Okay, Mike, everybody be quiet for a sec. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Profiling Evil by Mike King and Chris McDonough. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are really looking forward to some of the content that we have tonight. Chris, how you doing tonight?
Mike, good evening. Hello, everybody. It's great to have you here this evening.
Really good to see you. Chris, we got a couple of special guests with us tonight. Let me first introduce Natalie Feuerstein. And Natalie, if you'd raise your hand, it's pretty easy to tell which one's a Natalie, I hope. And Trooper Mike Miller, we are so grateful for both of you being with us. This is really a special day because we have been talking in our last broadcast about a woman who disappeared on Mother's Day exactly 3 months ago today. It's pretty special for one reason, Chris. Why is today such an important day?
It is, Mike. So this is the anniversary of the disappearance of Suzanne Morphew. So we want to keep her in our thoughts and prayers this evening as well.
Yeah, thanks, folks. We hope you're not only praying for her safe return, but also for law enforcement, who has a monumental task of putting this entire investigation into play and trying to find her. There's going to be a special event tonight at 9 o'clock in Salida. Our friend Lauren Scharf from Fox 21 News is going to be there and I think doing something live. So we would invite you all to join there. We're going to put up a hashtag too, that if you get a minute, text out send out a tweet and remind your friends to take a moment and think about Suzanne. And we want to just take a moment and report back on something we asked you to do Saturday night. And that was to text Suzanne's extended family your feelings. There were hundreds of tweets that went out. And Chris, you had a chance to meet with family today. What was their response?
They were overwhelmed, Mike. They are so grateful, everybody, for you, all the kindness and the thoughtful consideration statements that were brought to them. And they wanted us to let you know how grateful they are and thank you for that. And to keep moving forward. She's still out there. That's what they want.
Thank you, Chris. And we want to just take a minute and recognize so many of you that have been actually in the chat room on and off all day. So King Donahue, Tasha McGregor, Mimi J2, Mark Ray. The list just keeps growing and growing. We've picked up 150 people in just the last 30 seconds. Human Animal, Dewey, Tasha, it is just so great to see you. And as we go through our content tonight, we would just ask you to be aware that we're so grateful for the expressions that you put into those chats. We have moderators who are standing by to help out, and we appreciate what they're doing. But above all, we appreciate the quality of people that join this channel and chat. You keep it at a higher level, and we really appreciate that. To those of you who have taken advantage of our memberships, we're so grateful for that. And of course, those of you who weigh in with super chats throughout the evening, thank you. We are going to take some periodic breaks to answer some questions in chat, but we just wanted to make sure that we extended those thoughts as well. Chris, did you have anything along those lines before we get rolling?
Mike, we are just grateful for everybody. And so what do we got going tonight, Michael? I mean, I know we've got some great guests here, but this is a big one. So I just want to tell all our PE family, code 33, buckle up. This one's coming at you tonight. What do we got, Michael?
Thanks, Chris. We're going to start off with one thing that we want you all to take advantage of. Had a few of you who have asked about some books. Some of those are out of print, but I just decided we're going to put together a little drawing for anyone who's interested in a little 4-pack of books that I've written in the past. We're going to put up a little link for you where you can go out and you can enter into that drawing and get those. The 4 books are a book that I did with a friend called Who Killed King Tut? It's an investigation into the coldest cold case in world history.
And the most watched show on the Discovery Channel, too, by the way.
That's true. It is an Emmy Award-winning film that we had the opportunity to participate in several sessions and doing, and it is a 3,300-year-old cold case, folks. So I whenever Chris starts talking about all the cold cases he solved,
I started calling it King Tut. King Tut after that one.
There you go. And then another book called Predators that's included in there, a book called Profilers that I was privileged to join with other profilers in writing one of the chapters in. And then finally, a personal favorite of mine, a book called Jane, about the murder of my great-great-grandmother in 1891. And 130 years later, I was fortunate enough to solve her murder. So it's kind of a fun book. So please go to the link and enter to win for that book. But let's get started right off the bat. We're going to talk about Robert Ben Rhoades. And Rhoades was a serial sexual sadist, a truck driver who was roaming the United States, picking up hitchhikers and murdering them. The really frightening part about Rhoades was that he would keep those victims in his sleeper berth of his truck for up to 2 weeks at a time, punishing them, abusing them, assaulting them, and then eventually executing them. We're really fortunate tonight because we have the trooper who arrested this devil and got him off of the road and ended this reign of terror. And then we also have a scientist who has helped us look at the magnitude of these crimes and the amount of destruction that they caused across the United States. Some people suggest that Rhoades was responsible for somewhere between 50 and 300 homicides in the United States. This is a terribly destructive human being. And one of his cases happened to be a case that I was able to work with investigators on, and with my mentor, Greg Cooper, who taught me this art and science of profiling to be able to provide some profiling on the case. Greg, Chris, and I have trained law enforcement all across the United States on this case. And while we have really cut back some of the horrible pictures and things that only Mike and Chris and I know existed as a result of that devil, we think we're going to be able to show you some things tonight that really help teach us who this person is. Chris, any thoughts? And then we'll dig in.
No, I think it's we're just grateful that we have our wonderful guest here tonight. We want to thank you guys up front, and I think we're all going to learn something here. So I think we get going.
Yeah, and we're going to just let them go back into what we call the green room. They can sip on their sodas and relax while you and I kind of lay out the case, and we'll bring them back in a few minutes. So thanks, Natalie. Thank you, Mike. We'll see you in just a moment. So, Chris, let's talk about Robert Ben Rhoades. And how do you not start without this picture here, folks? This is Robert Ben Rhoades and a collection of images that I collected over the years as I kind of watched him through the prison system and through prior to going to prison. Chris, as you look at that, what's the first thing you think of?
Man, I'll tell you, scary dude, scary guy here. Yep.
Yeah, this guy was born in Council Bluffs, Iowa, folks. He was raised in what sounded like a pretty normal family, born in 1945. His father served in the U.S. Army, and then he later served as a firefighter once he got out of the Army. His mother, we really don't know a lot about, do we, Chris? She just a stay-at-home mom, and kind of that's about all I know anyway.
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, right? We'd be looking at this guy as kind of have, somewhat of a stable, childhood, and maybe even, into his teenage years. But that wasn't the case for sure.
Yeah. So as he evolved, and it's always kind of interesting when we look at suspectology to think about this evolution of this creature that we're talking about. But this was a kid, by the time he reached high school, he was playing sports and he was wrestling, kind of macho kinds of things. And I think he was really into being macho, although he was a pretty small framed guy in reality. What I thought was interesting was that he also sang in the school choir while he was doing all of that, which I think that's just awesome that he actually loved the arts, but it was kind of separate from what you'd expect out of a football player and a wrestler. And if you're a football player and a wrestler, please don't assume that I'm categorizing anything, but something interesting happened as he was getting older and into his graduation year, his senior year. He started to have some kind of teenage brushes with the law. I think, weren't you telling me he had an auto theft and?
Yep. A couple, I mean, just not major stuff. It was just kind of, it gave him a touch point into the system. We'll just call it that, right?
Yeah. And so he's getting close to graduation, and then he has this, I think, a really defining moment in his family's life. 2 months before graduation, his father gets arrested for sexually abusing a young girl in the community, a 12-year-old girl. Imagine what that was like on this kid.
Who this reminds me of is Brandon, right? I mean, he's almost in that formidable phase here, getting towards high school, the end of high school, boom, trigger event, something very significant, something very impactful to the family, and it revolves around a sexual assault. You just wonder at this point where he's at in his secret life, and he's starting to develop it.
Yeah, interesting point. So, interestingly, he graduates from high school, and then shortly after graduation, his father's arrested on a second sexual assault of a child. And do you remember what happened there?
I don't recall the exact disposition of it, Mike.
Yeah, it was only like within days after that happened that his father commits suicide.
That's right.
And of course, now that adds another huge weight on the shoulders of this family and this young man. He decides to go and join the military. And this is one of the areas where we really start to have fun as profilers to talk about. So he has this opportunity to go into the military. He's already shown that he's kind of interested in trying to be macho. And he goes out and he selects the Marine Corps, which in his mind was the most difficult branch of the military to join up in. And he jumps into the military and does fairly well through boot camp and gets out. But it isn't very long until he ends up going out and committing an armed robbery somewhere, and he's discharged, and he receives a dishonorable discharge from the military and is sent home. Again, talk about triggering moments in people's lives, Chris, as we think of this.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is frame it up, right? We've got that's going to be the early 60s by this point. And, Marines are revered because they've just coming off the Korean War and the Chosin Reservoir in 1950. So, they were looked up to as, heroes and icons. And so here, he's at 6, 7 years old when he starts, seeing these types of things, kicking off and in the news and stuff. And now he hits the early 60s and he grabs the Marine Corps. I mean, they're like the best guys going at that time in terms of the persona. And lo and behold, he gets a bad discharge, BCD, a bad conduct discharge. And he's booted out of the Corps, which is, quite problematic. I mean, it lowered him to, an unachiever, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
What do you think, Mike?
So yeah, no, I'm right with you. So this guy comes home from the military, He's got to feel very subconscious about, or self-conscious about, the fact that he wasn't able to complete his service. But he gets home and he tries to kind of put his life together. He marries a woman. They're married for about 4 years. And in that marriage, he has one son. The marriage falls apart. And soon he marries again. That marriage fails. He marries again. And so now he's on wife number 3. He's working menial jobs. He's changing from job to job. You just see this really dysfunctional kind of life starting to open up. And that's where I'm going to kind of take it up, because then he ends up meeting a woman named Deborah. And folks, you can probably figure out her last name online, but he meets a woman who really thinks he's a pretty amazing person when she first meets him. I'd like to just play a little video clip from one of the films that are online to just show what happened in this experience.
I can remember the night we met. My girlfriend and I, we'd go out to the bar to go dancing and meet our friends and have fun. And this guy in a pilot's uniform came up to me.
Hello there.
Hi.
I was kind of impressed because he was in the pilot's uniform, and I thought that was kind of cool.
You know, you have to be the most beautiful woman I've ever seen.
Thanks.
I asked him what his name was, and he told me his name was Dusty Rhoades. We had drinks, we danced. He started telling me how beautiful I was, that I was just the type of woman he was looking for. The more we got to know each other, he seemed like everything that my mother told me that a man was supposed to be. Responsible, patient, and understanding. And he seemed like everything that I wanted for a friend and maybe later a partner.
Yeah, so here we've got this woman, Chris, who is essentially swept off of her feet by Rhoades. And isn't it interesting, this guy that's working menial jobs shows up in a pilot's uniform?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have scripted that right out of Hollywood, right? I mean, he's playing the role, and he's playing it to the top. So, he was looking for that for sure.
Yeah, we keep harping on this victimology continuum and this idea that when you get into a place where you are not in your normal circles, you accept a certain amount of risk, and that is meeting people that you don't know anything about. And I guess that's how we all are. We're meeting people that we don't know to one degree or another. But she says this was my knight in shining armor, if I remember one of her quotes.
Yeah.
And that he was the most gentle person she had ever met. In fact, she even commented at one point, I had reported to me that she said there was never any attempt to get into intimacy or anything else during the time they were dating. He was just an absolute gentleman. But she then says that as they progress, kind of some weird things started happening. One that I thought was really interesting is on one particular occasion while they were going out, he tricked her and handcuffed her, and this just terrified her. She had those red flags going off like crazy that we talked about the other night. Excuse me, but because she loved him by this point, she abandons what her senses are telling us. What do you think there?
Mike, and we talk to all of our viewers here, right? I mean, that we have been saying that, you got to follow your gut. Your gut's right. And even though, you get to that situation where, I guess one way, a good way of maybe thinking through this is, the devil is patient. But the devil in the details, okay, are important. And one has to stay, pretty focused on that aspect of it. You want to grab a couple of questions, Mike? What do you think?
Well, sure. Yeah, we can. Although I haven't seen any that popped up, Chris, that
Okay. Sorry about that.
I've noticed. No, maybe you can look while we're going here. Folks, we're talking about Robert Ben Rhoades, a serial sadist who was a truck driver killing women in the early 1990s. The thing that was so amazing to me is that this individual, as he's evolving, we can start to see his personality developing. And we just talked about the fact that he met this woman who now is his fourth wife. Her name is Deborah, in a bar, and they have started a relationship, and she thinks he's her knight in shining armor. Well, interestingly, this pilot that she fell in love with, as soon as they decided to get married, I don't know, I guess a lot of people go through this. He decides to quit his pilot job and become a truck driver, Chris.
So, where does that correlate back to, you think, his relationship with his dad? Wait, do you remember what was, seemed like a pretty stable situation up until the high school incident, right? And then it just kind of went sideways from there, right? And so I guess we have to ask now, what was mom all about? Where was mom during all of this in terms of, what's your thought on those dynamics with the parents with Ben?
Yeah, we don't know a lot again about mom, so we really don't know what his relationship is with his mother. We don't know really what his relationship is with his father. This is a person who really doesn't share a lot of information. And as we talk about the short interview that Cooper and I had with him, he didn't share a lot of information with us as well. But I would think like most children, he loved his mom and dad. Had to have been heartbroken by what happened with his dad's decision. But, I always wonder in these cases if there was abuse in the family too, because just because your parent makes a poor decision like suicide, it doesn't turn you into a serial killer. Yeah,
no, exactly. And that's, you have to wonder if, but a lot of deviant behavior, right, Mike? It's kind of, it just kind of compiles on each other. And, with the fuel that's available today, i.e. the internet, right? I think, back then they didn't have that. So they had to really seek it out. And so you just wonder what those dynamics were once dad, was getting popped with the sexual assault stuff. And then what he must have been thinking. It's like, am I like this? Am I becoming this? And I could see some gray area there in his early adolescent development. And then maybe he tried to overcompensate that with the Marine Corps, joining the Marine Corps to kind of try to suppress it and control it. But we obviously know what the result of that was. That wasn't the case.
Yeah, right? Really, really good point. He makes this relationship with Deborah based on falsehoods. Somehow in her mind, and she says that she had all these red flags flying up, but refused to listen to them because she was in love. And it's a real good reminder to us of how important it is to be very careful in this process of relationship building. But I found it always so interesting that he then decides, okay, I'm going to be a truck driver instead of an airline pilot, which then she catches him kind of in the lie. And he says, oh, no, I just do that to kind of have fun. And again, she's hearing this red flag and she chooses to stay with him. Well, the challenge is that she now is starting to get pulled into a relationship that starts to become sexually abusive, and demands are being made. requests to participate in swinger parties and other things. And it's an interesting dynamic that we see in victims oftentimes is they start to actually believe the rhetoric that they're told by the offender. And she starts even thinking, well, am I weird because I don't want to participate in this kind of behavior? And I don't want to just have a relationship. I mean, that I do want to have a relationship with just one man. And I think you've seen this in cases you've investigated over the years where one side of a relationship or another will abandon all common sense because of love.
Yeah, and that goes back to your point, Mike, about where, they have these gut checks through the course of, these behavioral checks. So they're watching these behavioral checks, and yet they're not, but wanting to believe that, oh no, that's what I'm really seeing here. Okay? And so there's this it just kind of goes to the side, which empowers a further behavior down the road. And we're not saying that, because I'm as quirky as they come, just ask my wife, right? I mean, just in life, we're not talking about, relationship where a husband and wife are in sync, and then there's just kind of a one-off. We're talking about one-off, 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 and it just keeps progressing forward.
Yeah. Well, she made one comment as I move into a slide here. She said that whenever he was on the road, he would come home and he was just so delightful and relaxed and kind. But if he went a period of time without driving, that's when he started becoming more abusive. Yeah. And folks, you can weigh in on the chat line here, but I think you can understand why that's happening. Let's talk about the first assault that we categorize in this case. This guy had been committing these crimes for 15 years. And as we look at 4 cases in particular that ramp up to a time that he's arrested, think about the fact that he indicates to his victims, I've been doing this kind of thing for 15 years. The first case we're going to talk about is a woman named Patricia Candace Walsh and Douglas Zykowski. They were newlyweds, Chris. They were in the Seattle area. They fell in love. And the first thing that they wanted to do as a new couple was they wanted to go and preach the Christian faith in the southeast part of the United States. And so they start hitchhiking, and along the way, just in Texas, they're picked up by Rhoades in his vehicle. And all we knew for about 7 years that I was involved in this case was that Candace's body was later found in central Utah, and Texas authorities were investigating Douglas Zykowski's body found in Texas alongside of a highway. It was a really peculiar pattern that was starting to be seen, and I just leave it at that as we start to move through, and we'll come back to Candace's story in the end, but it took some time to figure out who Candace and Doug were. They became some of those 100,000 missing people every year in our country that never return home. Now,
so Mike, quick question.
Yeah.
Processing that as an investigator. Back then, the technology back in 90, you explained, some of the things that you guys had to get through to kind of connect some dots here to get into.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting case because actually Greg and I were teaching a course in southern Utah to investigators, and one of the deputies that was handling Walsh's homicide walked up and said, "Hey, I got a couple pictures I'd like you to look at." And Greg and I looked at the photographs, and the way that the individual's hair was brought over her left shoulder and some really interesting things, we both looked at each other, and I said, well, if your victim was shot with a .25 caliber weapon to the temple, then we know who did that. And the officer was like, what? Yep. And it led to looking more deeply into the case. And of course, they did some incredible detective work, but it eventually tied them forensically when they identified that bullet. to a case that Trooper Miller is going to talk about, and that tied it back to the Zykowski's murder in Texas forensically, which started to link those two together. But along the way, the name that popped up, Rhoades, came up a month later before any of this came to our knowledge. In fact, Patricia hadn't even been discovered at this time. And that particular case happened to involve a young woman named Nicole Tuttle, who was picked up in California. And 2 weeks later, after being chained and assaulted inside of this suspect's vehicle, she was able to break free in Houston, Texas, and run down the road. I've got a little video clip I want to play just to kind of help bring a sense and maybe a reality to that. So if we could tee that up, Tyler, that would be great.
Yeah.
And as he's pulling that up, Chris, again, this woman was running down the middle of a road, screaming for help. One of the things I found so interesting is she said so many vehicles passed by, not wanting to get involved. If this predator had been able to pursue her, he could have easily collected her back up and taken her. We might have some problems with the video. We'll try it one more time here.
And while he's doing that, Mike, let's not forget that his first victim, he kept her for how many weeks? Like 2 weeks, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Missionary? Right.
Oh, let's see. We don't have the audio, so we'll give it. We'll come back to that in just 1 minute. But the thing that was so interesting about this case is that she was taken to the police department. They pulled over the driver of the truck that she had escaped from, which ended up being Robert Ben Rhoades, and the police took her to the scene of Rhoades' truck to identify Rhoades as her attacker. When she saw him, she was so traumatized by just seeing him again that she curled up in a ball and said, I just won't talk to him. I just can't identify him, and that's not the guy. From there, he was able to get away with it and go on. I think we can play this now. We see that Tuttle gets there, and she is unable to face this accuser and identify him as the one who assaulted her. What's the dynamic there, and how many times did you see that in cases that you investigated?
You know, that fear is very real. And, these poor gals, I mean, in this particular case, obviously that young lady had been held for quite some time with him. And just, we can only imagine not only the physical, trauma and violence of that, but the emotional, mental abuse that takes place. And they really, more than anybody, and I think our viewers know, they try to break them down to almost like a brainwashing. And I think if we look at even Patty Hearst is a good example. I mean, she's the gal back in the day during when she was taken, and she spent a long time with folks to the point where they even had her doing bank robberies with her. So there's a syndrome that came out of it in a big study. It was called I've just drawn a blank on the name of it.
Yeah, it's not Munchausen.
No, I almost said Munchausen. I didn't, but you knew where I was going. But everybody knows, right? Stockholm.
There you go.
And it's essentially what's taking place here. I mean, there's a transfer of an out-of-body experience, and it's just seeing him just absolutely froze her. I can only imagine what was going on.
Yeah, you're right. How could you ever imagine what was going on? Well, let's now shift. She's unable to say he was my abductor, and so he drives away. Chris, it is a month later that we know about the next case, and I don't believe that it was the only case that happened in that month's time. As you pointed out a minute ago, his MO was to keep these people for a couple of weeks in this sleeper berth. So imagine being chained inside of this sleeper berth. The victims that survived lost a great deal of weight, and of course were tortured and sexually assaulted for weeks. But the next one that we're going to chat about is the one that I think probably impacted me personally the most, because at the time I first investigated this case, it also kind of resonated with the age of my own children. And that was Regina K. Walters. And Regina was this beautiful, beautiful 14-year-old girl. I mean, as you look at those pictures of her, Chris, is this a kid that's afraid of life?
No, she's just purity, pure innocence of taking it on. Pure innocence of taking it on.
Yeah. She was a neat little kid. And now I hope I have the story right, because I had it relayed to me by a police officer who actually had met and got this firsthand. But Regina had an older sister who had tried to run away from home and marry her boyfriend. Her mother said, absolutely not. You're not going to marry that boy. And there was a terrible issue in the family. And I hope I've got it right, but I think that her older sister committed suicide after getting into this fight with her mother. Well, only a few short years later, Regina announces that she loves this boy, 16-year-old Ricky Lee Jones, and she wants to marry him, run away and get married. Now imagine the pressure on this mom as she's trying to keep this little family together, and she's gone through a traumatic experience like that. And now, and I hope I've got the suicide story right, but now Regina's saying, I want to run off. Well, like any mom, she said, absolutely not. And Regina goes to her room and slams the door. I think mom had to go to work, but Regina sneaks out of the house and meets up with Ricky Lee Jones. And the two of them start hitchhiking on the freeway and leave the area. It's the last time they're heard of. And the family spends a month or more and years. What we find is that they actually travel over with Rhoades. He picks them up in the vehicle, and he drives east into Louisiana, where he executes Ricky and then heads to Illinois with Regina. Now, I just want to step back and think about the logistics and the challenge that Rhoades has in his hands by picking up these two kids, and how he's going to gain control over Regina when she's got this boy with her. What are your thoughts, sir?
I think part of that is, to utilize him as a threat mechanism to his victim, Regina. Ultimately, they're both victims, but in order to control her, you have to control him. And so he was such a manipulating, evil person that he was able to use him against her. And ultimately, his demise, if I remember right, was right in front of her. It was kind of like it was over, and now he had total control over, this young girl at this point.
Yeah. Could you imagine the control that he would have if he, in essence, executes the boy in front of her?
Yep.
And then tells her, now do what I say or you're next.
Yeah, exactly.
You hear people say, why don't they just run, or why don't they get away? Speaking of victims, well, holy cow, there is a ton of psychological baggage that has just been thrown on top of this little girl, if in fact that's right. And it brings up a really interesting question, and that is, but why didn't Rhoades just take Ricky Lee Jones down the road and conk him over the head, throw him on the side of the road, or tell him to get out of the truck and drive away? Why didn't that happen? He didn't need any witnesses.
That would have been a problem. The young boy would have gone immediately, probably, and called the police. And now the cops know, what type of vehicle it is. They've got a description of the suspect. They know where the girl is. in terms of, she's in this truck traveling around the country. So, it was to his advantage, i.e. Rhoades' advantage, to, take this young man out of the picture.
Yeah, agreed. Well, so we don't really know what happens to Ricky immediately. We learn later. But now you've got this girl in your vehicle that you're trying to control. And one of the things that we try to do in these investigations is to almost vicariously understand what the criminal's mind is and what they're doing. It's clear that in this case that Regina was the primary target. Ricky was just a liability that needed to be removed. And that poor young man was shot and just buried somewhere along the road. He's found actually a year later, almost in the same month that the abduction occurred. But now you have this beautiful girl who you've got in your car, and you've executed Ricky. And we actually even found a note later during the search warrant that I thought was interesting that tells us what Rhoades was thinking and what he did with Ricky. And from Rhoades' notebook, we see this inscription that he wrote in the book, Ricky's a dead man. And what's the purpose of doing that in this book, do you think?
He's keeping track almost, of his work. I mean, it's his diary, and he's living some of his fantasies through this diary. And so he's writing them down so that he can go back and revisit them at some point.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? I keep a diary. Do you keep a diary? You go back and read some of the things and you reflect on them. You hopefully learn from some of the mistakes you've made. But it's a great place to have a memory.
Yep, exactly. And
yeah,
for him, go ahead, Mike.
There's something else that they do along the way, at least these serial killers, as part of this memory. In fact, we would look at this as part of that same kind of collection process that a serial killer goes through. But what are some other technical terms for the collection of things to help remember what's happened?
They're trophies. There's this, what we call in a behavioral analysis side, that these are their memories of the event. They take the suspect back into the fantasy. They take the suspect back into the delusion, into the brutalness of the crime, and they relive it basically. And I think we saw that with Brandon Wilson during his demonstration of how he took Matthew's life. He says, I have my knife right here, and boom, when he grabs me, he's living that whole fantasy. This is a reflection of just that, what Rhoades is living here. Only he pens his out.
Yeah, that's great. In fact, folks, if you haven't seen this segment that Chris and I did on Brandon Wilson, this budding, if not true serial killer, please go back and look that one up. But yeah, he takes and executes this boy alongside the road. Well, interestingly, he's now got a girl, and he's got to somehow reduce his risk as he travels around. And one of the ways that we see that's fairly consistent, one thing he did was he would put the victim in the back seat of the truck, or in the sleeper berth of the truck. He would chain them up, and he actually had a torture chamber built in the backs of his sleeper berth, and he would strip these victims. And of course, he did just terrible things. But I want you to think about something. When he was driving with her in the vehicle, or taking her in to shower or go to the restroom, he had to do something that changed what this person looked like. And in other circumstances, we'd ask for some responses of how you might change this person. But I'm going to just cut to the chase, Chris.
Yeah.
The way that he changed this person was he cut her hair. Yep. And I want you to pay really close attention, folks, not only to the fact that her hair's cut. This is the same beautiful girl you see on the right, but now she has a look that's almost like a boy, except for this sweater that she's wearing. And I don't know if that sweater was a stage prop, Chris, for this image that he was taking, because I would bet that he didn't have someone that he was trying to make look like a boy wearing that inside the truck as he was driving around.
Were
But
you able to figure out, Mike, if that sweater had belonged to another victim, or was there a theory in that at the time floating around?
Yeah, I think, in fact, we don't know if that belonged to Regina. There's nothing to support that it did, but the sweater does become important later. So folks, just take a good close look at that sweater as we look at that. And then Chris, as we kind of now speed up the process, this child was taken and she was killed sometime later. But what I want to do right now is I want to introduce you to our first guest, which is Trooper Mike Miller from the Arizona State Police, retired now. And we're going to just chat a little bit with Mike about some of the things that he remembers as he met Rhoades. And Mike, I don't know if you even remember being that young, but you used to be that young, brother.
I remember that. That was when they. Was when they took a picture of me here at the office after the arrest, and this stuff started coming out. That they did a video out here in the parking lot of me.
Well, you and I became friends 30 years ago when this case broke open, and I always loved your description of what happened. But first, tell everyone a little bit about when you hired on and when you retired from the patrol, and where you were stationed. And thankfully, your old friends at the station allowed you to come in and actually shoot from police headquarters. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I started to work for the Highway Patrol in August of 1970. Actually, it's been 50 years ago this month that I started. And
wow.
The calendars are the same thing. You know, when I started the 1st of August, and that was my starting date. And it was this is the Saturday, but and the whole thing is, this was the month that I started 50 years ago. This would have been.
This is the first picture that was taken. One of the first. Yeah. Wait,
So,
well, were mustaches optional, or were they mandatory equipment?
I had tried for years to grow one, and I ended up growing. So I had one there. But anyway,
so Mike,
my first station when I got out of the academy was Holbrook, Arizona. I was up there for about 8 years, and I was a desert rat, and there's no way in the world this boy could handle that cold weather. And I finally had to leave from there. But while I was in Holbrook, I captured another killer.
Oh, who was that?
Made a U-turn in front of me, in front of the Circle K in Holbrook. And looking in the van, we found that what looked like ketchup hanging out of had run out of the door, but it was actually blood. And the hitchhiker that he had picked up told me that the guy had put some dirty, bloody clothes in rest area by Winslow. And we had people go by there, and they found him. And the next day, the officers came from, I believe, the Prescott area, because this is where the guy had been dumped. And they found him beside the road, rolled up in a bedroll, as if he was sleeping. And the murder weapon was in the car, was a steel bar that he had split his head open with. And that was my first murder. But anyway, getting back to, then I came back to Casa Grande, which was my hometown. And this is where I spent the remainder of my career. And I retired
Mike,
in 2000.
Mike, before you, I want to ask you something. I want to play a video of that night. Now, this is Hollywood, but and then I want you just to tell everybody what that night was like in Casa Grande in 1990. So if we can play that, we're gonna move forward and have us all watch. Mike, take us back to that night, and and tell us exactly what was happening and what you were thinking, and just walk us through the whole thing.
Well, to start with, that tractor was a conventional. The one Rhoades was driving with a cab forward, a cab over. So that thing, and then it wasn't raining. And I walked up to the back of that. Well, to start with, I always check on trucks that are parked beside the road, especially in a situation with their emergency lights on. I need to find out what's going on because he had not put his triangles out, which he's required to do. And I went out to check and find out if he was not relieving himself beside the road, which what I use. I'm death on truckers when they were doing that. And I write them a ticket, and they were, of course, not very excited about this, but I wrote them a ticket. And I wrote Ben Rhoades a ticket for that very same thing. But anyway, I walked up to the truck, and I moved around to the front of the tractor and looked up into the truck. I could see something was going on. So I moved back to the door, and then I climbed up on the side, showing my flashlight in, and I saw this woman with her hands, handcuffed above her head and a horse bit around her neck. Now, I had horses when I was a kid, so I knew what the bit was about. But why it was on her, I couldn't figure out. But anyway, and then she started screaming, and that's when Ben Rhoades came bounding out of the sleeper berth, down into the driver's seat, and I stepped back down onto the ground, and he came out of the vehicle and immediately put his hands up on the side of the vehicle and said, "Hey, we're fine, we're consenting adults and all this good stuff." And then going through my mind is, if you're consenting, why is she shackled in the back of your vehicle? What is going on here? So
let's stop there for a minute. In a moment, we're going to look at some pictures that you captured that day and talk about this, but let's go back to this again. The life of a police officer is filled with, a little bit of boredom and then a ton of adrenaline. But this is something that is never covered in a police academy. Let's go back and talk about that again. This woman was chained and shackled inside the vehicle with a horse bit.
That's correct. And it jars your curiosity. What is going on here? This isn't normal.
And he's up on the berth at this point. He's still he's up on the berth side. So you don't see him yet.
No, I don't see him at all until the curtain opens that's in the sleeper berth, and he comes bouncing into the driver's seat, and that's when I step back and the door comes open and he's down on the ground and, "Hey, officer, we're fine." Of course, he's done this before. And I try hey.
Mike, from an officer safety perspective, what are you processing quickly that's going on here?
Need to keep an eye on this guy.
Okay.
Simply from the standpoint, something's not right, and I need to maintain control of him. And that was when I handcuffed him and then put him in my patrol vehicle. And then with the belt and everything else. Go ahead, Mike.
Mike, he asked for, or he announced that he had a weapon in his pocket too. So kind of walk through that and break it down for us, because that weapon actually became incredibly important in the overall investigation.
Yes, it did. But, I did not know who this subject was. I did, Ben Rhoades or anything else. He was just a suspect that I had arrested, and all the rest of the incredible information about this man came together earlier from the investigator who took over the case. Because, I'm basically traffic, and this had to be processed by someone who knew what they were doing. And that's why I got a hold of the city PD and had their detective come out to take over the situation. Now, the pictures inside the vehicle were taken by a Cass County police officer doing the evidence collection. I did not take any photographs of her or anything.
Mike, unpack for us for a moment, okay, before we jump into the pictures, if that's okay. Unpack the emotional response from the victim when you got up into that cab and what you saw. Kind of tell us what was going on when you got up there, and how did you get her out of the back up there?
I did not do that.
Okay.
I went back to the car with Rhoades, got him secured, and then I left and went back up to the car because I knew she was there. She was still screaming.
Okay.
I went back up and I got into the cab and I saw the condition that she was in. And I told her, ma'am, you're safe. This man is not going to bother you anymore. Just relax. And I covered her with a blanket. And I said, ma'am, you're a piece of evidence. And I need to leave you where you are until the investigators can get here to see what's going on. Because, I didn't know what, I was going to disturb anything or create a problem. They needed to see the situation as it was with her handcuffed and chained inside that vehicle.
And what was her reaction when you said she's safe? What was her reaction? What was her reaction when you said she's safe?
She kind of calmed down a little bit. She stopped screaming, but she was still, excited about the situation. Then when I covered her up, she felt a little bit better about the situation and was a little more, she wasn't completely, totally relaxed, but she was in a situation that she wasn't afraid for her life anymore, like she was before. Because from what I understand from Officer Barnhart said that he had told her what he had been doing, so she knew what he had been up to. I didn't get this from I got this from Barnhart. This isn't what I got from her. But anyway, she was.
Let me ask you though, because I don't know if people can sense the emotion that was placed on you as you can hear this woman, even when you're taking Rhoades back and putting him in the vehicle, and even given the fact that you're telling her everything's going to be okay, you can still hear her screaming for help, and you got to balance between a dangerous felon in your vehicle and how you can give this person help. That's an emotional roller coaster for a police officer. What was going through your mind right at that moment?
I had been doing this for a long time, and now I just was calm about the situation, maintained my composure, and not let emotions get involved in it. When I got back to the car, that was a different situation. Here I found Ben Rhoades partially out of his handcuff, he got his handcuff, the seatbelt undone, and he had his hands in front of him. And if he'd gotten to his handcuff key, he could have let himself out of the car and been gone. Wouldn't have seen him again. But the whole situation wasn't that case. Then I got him back in his handcuffs, put the handcuff through his belt behind him so he could not get free again. And but as far as the emotion was concerned, the good Lord just took care of me and kept me under control, because he was in a situation where, hey, I've had it with this Ben Rhoades. We need to take him out.
Mike,
what to be in doing this?
Mike, what can you teach our viewers here? We have a lot of, women who watch our channel, and what can we teach them through this experience of what you experienced there about this young lady? I mean, ultimately, kind of unpack that for us. How did it kind of unfold? I mean, in totality.
Well, it just kind of just laid itself out, and 1, 2, 3, these items came out. I just did what was necessary and followed my training. It wasn't necessarily training about how to handle this, but if you're given the problem, let's solve it. And that's about basically what it was.
Right.
More than anything else, I maintained my composure, didn't get all excited about the situation, but I didn't know who this guy was. He was just a criminal or a person I had arrested, and we needed to put the pieces together later on. And as it came out, the people that were called in for the investigation, they're the one that put the pieces together. I merely got him to the point where he was confined and couldn't get away. And Rick Barnhart and the rest of the people and the teletype that he sent out put all the pieces together. They're the ones that made the case on Ben Rhoades. I just merely caught him and stopped him so he couldn't do anything more about what he was doing.
You're a real hero.
His criminal career. And that's basically what it was.
Yeah, Mike,
You're a hero.
you're very humble, but you saved that woman's life. I want you to look at a couple of pictures, Mike. Let's see if I can pull these up. There we go. So, Trooper Miller.
That's the bit that was around her neck. That's the tractor he was driving. The cab forward.
Yeah.
And there's Rick and the rest of the guys found all the other parts in his briefcase. Do you have those pictures in there of his briefcase?
I do. In fact, before we move on to that, I wanted to just explain, Mike, that also at that time, Lisa was chained inside of the cab, but they also Rhoades had also placed these huge clamps on Lisa and a bunch of different body parts, and those were chained to the wall as well. This wasn't just an abduction. This was a torture chamber, and this poor woman was just punished over time.
She was.
When you started to do the impound incident to the arrest, you came across also some additional items that were here that we wanted to just pop up.
Now, let me get this straight, Mike.
Yeah.
The Officer Guy Jack from the Cass Grand Police Department and Rick Barnhart were the ones that did the inventory on the vehicle. They're the ones that found all these things. They just provided me information about the rest of it later on. But I did not want to fool with anything inside the vehicle. I want to make sure that the officers had a chance to look through and take care of and inventory all the material that's in the vehicle. And the impound search was done by those officers.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
Mike, I think this is pretty heavy stuff that we're into here. So maybe let's take a deep breath here for a moment and just, we've got two questions that are sitting, with Carmeli. Thank you so much. So our question is, are people born evil or do they become evil? Or are they made into evil? Now, remember, we talk about two things, right, Mike, on the show, evil and pure evil. Okay. Tonight's episode is about pure evil, right? I think we all agree with this. Okay. But so Mike, what's your thought on are people born evil or do they develop it? What do you think, bud?
I think they develop it because they get away from what they're supposed to, and now we're getting to the point in religion and stuff like that. But I think they get waylaid by the devil, and he's the personification of evil, and that comes out in them. And that's where it comes from. That's what's the matter with our people today. They're fallen away from God. Now, I'm not being an evangelist here, but
okay, hang on just for a second, though. Hang on, Mike Miller. Hang on.
The personification.
Yeah.
I love you, Mike King. What do you think?
Yeah. So this I really appreciate that, Mike, because every person of faith that we've met, whether they are Christian or of Islam or Jewish or Buddhist, those faiths teach love and goodness, and I think all would agree that there's this represents evil. But the thing that always becomes an interesting question to us, Chris, that I think is kind of fun to look at is this argument between nurture and nature. Yeah. And some people would like to say, I just became bad because I didn't get warm cookies and milk after school on Thursday afternoons or something like that. While someone else on the opposite end of the spectrum, you being my Irish friend, I'll use this as an example. You, an Irishman might say, I fight because I'm Irish. I have no control over things. That's just what I do. And I know we have some viewers who are Irish as well. So, light me up on that one. But it really does become a question of nature versus nurture. Is it the fact that someone didn't get a mom and dad at their home and a normal life upbringing, or was it something that when they were older they just developed? That really is a tough decision. But here's the thing that I do know, and that you and I both, Greg Cooper, others have talked about, and that is when we get to the sentencing hearing where we talk about aggravation, what we really do is look at the behavior of the people, and we say, regardless of all of that, including whether they're crazy or not, if their behavior shows that they are thinking through this process, they're trying to be successful, they're trying to get away with what they're doing, and they're evolving and trying to get better or less organized, as we see in many cases, that becomes really significant. Because while they may have all of these problems, nurture, nature, mental illness, when they're doing those things, they understand what society standards are, and they choose to violate them anyway. And when they choose to violate them anyway, good people like Trooper Miller step in and stop their reign of terror so that we can keep them away from good people who are trying to just live their lives.
Nailed it, Mike King. I love it. So Maui Swift, that just answered your question, and thank you. Do we think he was born a killer? Mike just answered it. That's awesome. Mike King, what else we got going here? Where are we headed?
So Mike, we're going to just jump through this. What we found, what Barnhart and others found, was a rape kit that was in that vehicle. And we see it with burglars, a kit that they carry that helps them, a crowbar or other things, to be successful at what they do. But in here, there was a huge amount of pornography inside of Rhoades' truck as well. And so we start to see what the mindset is about this individual, what their thought processes are, and what they really are thinking about day in and day out. That's what really becomes significant in a case like this. The thing that I found interesting is when Barnhart and others got Rhoades to the police department and interviewed him, it was like 3:00 in the morning, if I remember right. And the first thing that Rhoades said is he kind of arrogantly stretched out in the interview room, and I can almost envision, if I remember right, Mike, the description of him pulling a drag on his cigarette that they'd given him and blowing his smoke in the air. And then he looked at him and said, "Hey, that woman was just a lot lizard, and she's not playing with a full deck." Well, Chris, what's a lot lizard?
Yeah. I mean, back then it was, a prostitute who was working truck stops, back in the day, right?
Yeah, that's true. But the whole situation in his case was he had gotten away with this before. And this was just a matter of when, this girl was not playing with a full deck, as Rhoades said. She had little bunny snippers on, and she was, on her way to Washington, D.C. to talk to the president and give him some information about, I don't know what, but anyway, that's where she was wanting to go. So, and he was playing on this. If he worked this right, he would be out of here in a matter of minutes. But the only thing is, this girl was going to come back and testify against him. He didn't know that at first. But I talked to Barnhart, and when they had gone over to California to interview her for the thing, they had told him that the girl was coming back to testify. So that was a different situation, that his attorney said, "You better take what you can get out of this and then go on down the road." But the whole situation was, he was very cool customer. And he had, because he picked on these women, and once he knew he could terrorize them, it was just a matter of time before he'd be released to go on down the road again and not worry about it.
Yeah, that became the real challenge, and what happened is, as he served time for the event that you worked on, Mike, investigators in Houston were linking up with investigators in Casa Grande, and they started tying the pieces together to that little girl, Regina. And if you remember, folks, that sweater that she was wearing in the photograph earlier, that ended up being something that was recovered in the search warrant in Rhoades' house, along with all these other items. And Chris, as we kind of move forward, because I want to get into the mapping now,
Yep.
Tell me what these items represent and why they're so significant.
Yeah, so we go back to this idea that he's learning through his behavior, and then simultaneously he's collecting. So he's becoming the collector at this point. So these are all going to be correlating to his fantasies in relationship to the particular victim and the victimology that he chose. And it's really fascinating, Mike King, because the guys like, Trooper Miller here, he had the wherewithal to kind of slow things down, and as crazy as it sounds, he wraps the girl in a blanket. You would think the initial, first impulse would be, well, unhook this girl and immediately get her away. But he was thinking big picture, how do we, he knew this guy's, and he said it doesn't look right? We call it DLR, doesn't look right? He knew this was a problem. It's a small piece of huge problem like this that these officers on a daily basis are catching quickly and containing it, that turns it into those photographs you just showed, Mike King. What do you think of that, Michael?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to jump forward in another image here, because I want to give those that are listening a quick assignment. So get your fingers ready to do a screenshot snap, folks. And if we can pull up this other image that I've got on the screen, one of the things that was also recovered was a notebook that is the one we referenced earlier with Ricky as a dead man. But you'll notice on the right-hand side are a bunch of coordinates that we've never been able to figure out, at least that I'm aware of. And my suspicion has always been, Chris, that it's the location of evidence or bodies along the way. So take a quick screenshot of that, and then crime fighters, send us a note if you can crack this one. Yeah, I will mention that this devil was such a rotten human being that he actually took Regina's family phone numbers and also called her father on a number of occasions and taunted him, telling him, your daughter, I understand your daughter's missing, and the father would plead for information. And then in his last call, he said, well, I had to cut her hair. Well, we saw a photograph of that, Chris. And then he said, you might look for her in a barn, an abandoned barn. And he hung up the phone, and that was the last call the father happened. Well, fast forward a few months, and investigators in Illinois were called by a farmer who was getting ready to actually burn an old barn alongside the freeway down on his property. And in there, they found a corpse, and the corpse is just too gruesome, folks, to put on there. Yeah, but in the search warrant that was conducted a few photographs before this were the photographs that you see on the right-hand side of your screen that are depictions of Regina Walters going through a series of steps before Rhoades put baling wire around her neck and tightened the wire 16 times until the child was dead. Chris?
Also, Mike, in this photograph, there's one from that area where his truck is pictured off the side of the road.
Yeah.
So he is in the area.
Yeah, and what's more important, Trooper Miller, is that by putting his truck in the picture, it's like someone who's taking a picture after they shot a trophy deer or they've captured a largemouth bass. It's a trophy that becomes very significant. Chris, before we go over to the mapping, I'd like you to just touch on what we see in this series of photographs of Regina and why they are this way, in our opinion.
Yeah, so I think what we see here is a sense of how a suspect can gain so much control over a victim that they try to dehumanize them. And, the cutting of the hair, you'll see that, that immediately takes her into a different, atmosphere, right? And you can see it on her face just sitting there. She's going along with this because she has no choice, or this guy, she doesn't know what's going to happen next. She can only imagine where she's been. And this is horrific in of itself. But he's gaining power in his fantasy as a result of putting her through all of this pain. And what he's doing now in these photos, you see her where she's, he's having her almost role play, Mike King, right? I mean, to where, make me feel that you're, afraid of me. And this was part of his sadistic sexual fantasy that he was digging into here by making this poor little girl go through this horrific event. And so I think that's what we're seeing here. Mike King, what do you think?
Yeah, no, exactly. And as we kind of close out this discussion with Trooper Miller, I want to just say, Mike, you stopped a serial killer, and we are so grateful for that. We're grateful for your years of service. There have been people weighing in, and one actually suggested, Jacqueline Henning, that she heard that there was once a book written about this. I think you got something to show off, don't you?
Yes, I do. It's called Roadside Prey, written by Alva Bush. And he goes through and catches up on Ben Rhoades and all his stuff. And also the investigating officers in here who did the work and put the pieces together to finally put an end to his career. I was not responsible for that. I just caught him and stopped him. These are the heroes that made the case against him. But we had a chance to keep him in one place and stop him from doing anything more.
Well, Trooper and Mike, I'm sorry, Trooper Miller, we've got to just give you a shout out here though, because our chat room and our family, the PE family, wants you to know how grateful they are for your service. And I mean, it's lit up here, and there's when you get a chance later on, and when this is uploaded in totality, go back and read the great comments that these good people are saying about you. You are a great hero. We are so thankful that you've been with us tonight.
I was doing my job as a highway patrolman. I enjoyed
That's what we love about you, man.
And, everybody says you go back and you say there's everybody has 30 seconds of something
Super Trooper.
And that will stay there for a long time because I got a book to prove it.
Well, that's awesome.
I thank all those people that made comments and stuff like that. I thank you for them.
Thank you, Mike. And folks,
Thank you, Mike.
if you can, give him another shout out, because Mrs. Miller is at home watching this on her computer.
Hi, Mrs. Miller.
And she had to put up with him then, and we have to put up with him now. So thank you.
And, there's one other thing.
And she bought this hat for me.
What about that? Oh!
She's the one that bought this hat.
All right. I want to move ahead. Thank you so much, Mike. Folks, I want to introduce to you one of the most amazing women I've ever had the chance to know. This is Natalie Feuerstein, and she is an intelligence analyst for those of us here at Profiling Evil, and our very close sister family, the Cold Case Foundation. But in her day job, she works for a company that we absolutely love here, ESRI, the Environmental Systems Research Institute, the largest mapping company in the world. And she's in charge of a team of folks that are developing investigative and intelligence software. She is the lead of that team. But the thing that I want to show you, and I'm going to just let's see, Tyler, if you could pull up
She doesn't know what's coming, Mike.
my screen. This amazing human being is also former 82nd Airborne U.S. Army. She served in Afghanistan and Operation Red Wings. So think about Mark Wahlberg and Lone Survivor. This is the real deal. She served tours overseas protecting our country, and we have been privileged to know her, and I have been privileged to know her for the last 14 years. Natalie, it is so awesome to have you here. I like this photo in the leather jacket more than the Army one, because this was when you ran for state Senate in Idaho. And so welcome to the show. We'd like you to maybe tell us just a little more about you, and then walk us through what you found as you looked at the case of Robert Ben Rhoades.
Well, thanks, Mike and Chris. It's truly an honor to be here. As you mentioned, one of the things that we do on my team is we build tools. A lot of us are prior Intel analysts, and part of our motivation for coming to a software development company was to build tools for analysts that are still out in the field, that are still practitioners. And the best way we can do that is to get our hands on real data. And so I was testing out some of our software, and I asked you if you had anything I could work with. And you were like, I sure do. So you gave me the trucking log. So all the waypoints that came out of the trucking log that was recovered during one of the search warrants from Rhoades. And then we kind of went from there to see what we could find. So I think if we could.
Yeah, and I might just mention, I mean, I'm really grateful that you came and joined us here, and I hope we can somehow beat the presentation that we originally put together on this, because just a few weeks ago, Natalie presented this case in front of 83,000 people. So she is a big deal and the real deal. And
I'm really not, but Mike, you're selling me well. Thanks.
I am just so proud to know you and have you here, and to know your husband, who also is a former Marine and served overseas protecting our country. So thank you. But Natalie, take it from here. I'm going to give it to you now.
Okay. And please interrupt me if I'm going too fast or if I'm not digging into anything enough. So these are all the waypoints. So out of that trucking log that was recovered, it was either recovered out of his residence there in Texas, or it was out of his truck. But either case, so this trucking log was recovered, and we could grab all of the waypoints out of there. And that trucking log included everything from where he stopped to refuel, when he blew out a tire and had to get a replacement, when he stopped and took off, so he had free time and he wasn't working. It includes all those times, and so we have, where he stopped, and he didn't write down coordinates, so it was really just like a place name, right? So he'd say, he stopped in the city name and the state, and then we know when he stopped. We don't necessarily know when he started driving again, but we do know where all the waypoints are when he stopped. So we mapped those out, and you can see he was everywhere, right? He didn't just have one route that he frequented. He drove all over the United States. And so then, using some of the analytical tools that we have, we started to break down his waypoints to find his routes. So I'll kind of walk through some of those. So we had Vine. So the route that he was taking when he picked her up, and we'll kind of zoom in here, and you can see he picked her up around here, and then drove through Phoenix down to Casa Grande, and that's where Trooper Miller was able to intercede and stop her and rescue her. And we also know when he had Tuttle. So you can see the route that he took. I know you mentioned that people have said, well, 2 weeks, was he really in the vehicle with him for 2 weeks? And she was. So she was picked up here outside of Los Angeles, and traveled around with him until finally she got free down here in Houston.
So how, I mean, this is just so hard to sometimes fathom, Natalie and Chris. Here we've got him going up into Utah, back down and across the country. We've spent 2 weeks basically punishing this person. I know that in the Regina Walters case, there was actually one person who, after this all came out, reported that Regina lipped the words, "Please help me," to them, but they just didn't want to get involved. It makes you wonder how often this is happening. I don't know. Chris, any thought?
That's, I mean, how scary is that, right? You're a victim and you're trapped and you're asking for help. I mean, I can only imagine what that poor girl was going through when that citizen walked away,
Right.
basically. I can only imagine what that process was in terms of what she was feeling.
Right.
I can't even think about it. Yeah, go ahead now.
Being with him for 2 weeks, the stops to go into a restaurant to get some food, or to go into a grocery store, or to go and use the restroom somewhere else. Like, how many opportunities there were for people to potentially see her, and whether she was able to communicate that she was in distress or not, we don't know. But 2 weeks is a long time.
What are your feelings? I mean, Natalie, as a woman, just even processing this data and now seeing it, out on a map, what were you feeling just kind of processing it?
I mean, I certainly would never hitchhike. I mean, that would be my initial reaction. Is to, I've watched a lot of the episodes, Mike, and to not put yourself in a high risk situation, right? Anytime that you take yourself out of what is normal and out of what you're putting yourself into a situation that you become the prey, if you will. And to avoid that situation as much as possible. Interesting.
As a trained soldier, do you think that gives you, some type of a cutting edge, or obviously you had some very, interesting zones that you've been in, i.e. combat zones, that kind of stuff. And then you come back to civilian life. What do you, back to the States, what process of your state of awareness do you think you gain a plus or minus by being in such a horrific combat zone area as well?
I mean,
there's
a kinetic threat that everyone, regardless of being a female or a male, faces when you're in a combat zone. And also being a female, you learn quickly to have a battle buddy, as we call them, to not, you don't walk around the base at night alone, and you don't put yourself in compromising situations. And that's just good practice to make sure that you're not in a situation in which you can become the victim.
Yeah. Well, let's continue on, Natalie.
So that was Tuttle, and she was able to escape, thankfully. And then this is looking at all of his routes, which when he had Walters with him.
So for the 2 weeks that he had Regina Walters, he is covering hundreds and hundreds of miles.
Yes, all over the place. So they were picked up. Regina and Ricky. Were picked up down here, and then you can see, where they went all over the place. You can these phone calls right here are where he called Regina's parents and communicated with them that he had her and that he cut her hair. And
back then, that's a phone booth, right?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep. And then this is where Regina, her body was finally recovered. And you can see all the different, I put some labels on here, so you can see all the different times he was near that area. Obviously, he didn't log the barn as the location that he stopped. But you can see how often he traveled around that area, and how many opportunities he was either scoping out that barn and considering it as a possible location, or driving by and making sure no one was there and it was truly abandoned, and able to kind of get a grasp on the area in which he would finally murder Regina.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That is an interesting observation, Mike. What came to your mind when
she
started saying that?
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that we found with Rhoades was that he took a lot of photographs of women in cars alongside of him as he was driving, especially because he was in a higher position. He could look down their blouse. I mean, this is how disgusting this human being was. And I can't imagine that it wasn't just 8 hours a day driving and 16 more hours a day when he wasn't, just fantasizing about the next event. And so this barn wasn't picked just because he ran out of gas. He was dreaming about that. He was fantasizing, and pretty soon he couldn't stand it anymore, and he found a victim that he could act out that final thing. But yeah, Natalie, let's go ahead and see where you took it from here, because this is fascinating.
And then the other route that we mapped out was Walsh. And this was, again, Candace Walsh and Douglas Akowski, who, started hitchhiking. And then Douglas's body was found in Texas. And it wasn't until much later in that year of 1990 when Candace's body was finally found. And I think it was by a couple of hunters that were off the road a little bit. And if we go in here, we don't know exactly when she was killed, but we can kind of imagine it was sometime around January 21st, because that's when, we know via the logs that Robert Ben Rhoades was on that route where her body was found.
Interesting. So, Natalie, one of the challenges that I gave you was that there are 104,000 missing people every year in the United States, but all we have are trucking logs that show us where Rhoades was on one particular moment in time and the next. Mm-hmm. But the difference in time became really interesting as you looked at this from a science standpoint. Why don't you share that?
Right. So we have, there's several different databases out there that, and you helped me understand this, that are, tracking missing people or unidentified people who have been found and they don't know who they are. And one of those databases is NamUs, the National, it's Association of Missing and Unidentified Suspects People. I don't know, but NamUs is what it is for short. And they do a great job. It's not all inclusive, unfortunately, but they do a great job at trying to, when there is an unidentified person found, or when there is someone who is missing, trying to capture information about that person, everything from their description and a photo of them to where they went they were last seen, and when they were last seen. And so we mapped those locations out, and these are all the missing people between 1984 and 1990. So when we have the trucking logs for Robert Ben Rhoades. And then what we did is we looked at his routes where he did not have, where he didn't have a known suspect with him, right? So when he didn't have Vine with him, when he didn't have Tuttle with him, when he didn't have Walters or Walsh or Douglas with him. And then we wanted to look at what are the correlations there. So we found these are all the routes that he took when he didn't have a known victim with him, when he could have had another victim. We matched that up using space-time proximity. So looking at where he have possibly traveled from that route in the amount of time between the different waypoints, right? So if it takes 24 hours to get 2 miles, you can go pretty far in that amount of time. And so then we found these potentially missing people that were within proximity of those routes. So I can bring up those routes again.
So using science and the location, you're able to identify possible subjects or possible victims, missing persons that would fit profiles that Rhoades preferred.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. So is there a way to look at this in a link analysis to try to put things together, or?
There is. So what you're seeing here is we have Robert Ben Rhoades in the center. And then we have all of his known victims. So we have Ricky Lee Jones, which is actually a suspected victim because we were not able to ever, his body was never found. But we do know that Regina Walters was a victim and he was convicted of killing Regina Walters. And then we have his other victims here as well as the routes that he took. And that's what you're seeing here with the highway symbol that were potentially associated with these missing people who went missing around the same time he was traveling near them.
That's amazing. Natalie, once you get something like this put together and you have it in place, how easy would it be to enter additional truck driving logs or the logs of cell phone data and do this same kind of analysis for law enforcement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you would just bring in the data. We have all the tools that are used to do this are here in a gallery of tools. We used a number of these different tools to put that together, this workflow, if you will. But it's really just looking at space and time, being able to ask questions of your data and find correlations in your data. And that's what this software is built to do.
That's just incredible. Now, Chris, I know you're going to probably have a question, and I'm going to let you ask it because then I got one final question I want to ask Natalie about.
Actually, I don't have any questions. I'm just grateful, to see this. I mean, this is amazing stuff when you see the analytics here and how it comes together, this link analysis. And for our viewers here, what link analysis is just what you're seeing in front of you. We're seeing correlated behaviors or data points that connect right back to a particular target. And, thank goodness Esri has this tool here. This is a fascinating piece.
Yeah, it really is. Well, Natalie, thank you. You're going to come back, right, and do some other shows in the future?
Anytime, especially if you give me data.
Yeah. Well, I got to just tell everyone. So I want you to end with one little story, Natalie. And our time is running short because we want to get off and support Suzanne Morphew's flipping on of the lights. But I just smile when I think about a Craigslist deal gone wrong that you were involved in. Could you just share that real quickly? And Chris, you're going to get a kick out of this.
I'm assuming you're talking about the couch.
Yes.
Okay. So me and my husband had just gotten back from Iraq. So we were a little feisty. And we were just trying to sell a couch on Craigslist. And we kept going back and forth with this guy. And we knew, I mean, after the second time we talked to him, we knew he was just trying to scam us. He ended up sending us a fake check. And so we forwarded that check on to the local, fraud office there at the FBI in Southern California. But then he kept communicating with us. And so I played dumb and told him I didn't have an email account that I could use. And in order for me to communicate with him, I needed access to email. And he ended up giving me his login information to use his email account. So I got on. And I quickly changed his password, and I contacted all the other people he was scamming and just let him know, we've taken control of his account, and he is scamming you. So please don't do further business with him. And here's a list of things to look for when you're trying to identify a scam. That was fun.
That is awesome, and that's why I'm so thrilled to have you on our team instead of somebody else's. Folks, please join us in thanking Natalie Feuerstein. It's just so wonderful to have you here, Natalie. Thank you.
Natalie, thank you for your service, and your husband, Semper Fi.
Thank you.
Well, Chris, Robert Ben Rhoades is now serving time in prison. I had a chance to interview him with Greg Cooper toward the end of my career, and it was kind of an interesting situation. It was, in my opinion, one of the few times that I feel like I was talking directly to the devil. And this was a man full of hate and is clearly a serial sexual sadist. The interview was very short. He ended up throwing the phone across the room and getting escorted out of the room pretty quickly. And Greg and I just kind of shrugged our shoulders and walked away. But since then, as we've taught this case around the United States, more and more opportunities have popped up to help law enforcement understand the characteristics. But most importantly, as we look at how technology has changed today versus a few years ago when we were in the saddle, officers are in a position now, if they will embrace the technology, including embracing what we like to call crowdsourced intelligence, the CSI information that you folks are pushing up to the evidence room. We can see some real changes going on in investigations. Give me a thought.
Mike, what a night, and I think on this one, better you than me. I'm grateful that you were there to, put this piece of the puzzle together. And to our viewers, I think that one thought that comes to mind for our PE family here is you're safe. This is a scary case, that's for sure. Okay? But continue to follow your gut and know of a surety that as you pay attention to your surroundings, you will never find yourself in a circumstance such as this. But keep following that. And one last piece, thank you so much again for all your kindness and the great comments that you've been given, Mike and I. I mean, we are beyond humbled. Thank you, those of you who, donate in the super chat. We just ask if you're enjoying what we're doing, that you push that, subscribe button down there, push the bell, share it with your friends, and we'll continue to do what we're doing. And hopefully we'll make a difference in your life as you're making a difference in ours. And that's what I'm thinking, Mike.
Thanks, Chris. I'm having some weird internet things going on here tonight, but thanks, everybody. We hope that you'll all go over and watch Lauren on Fox 21. Take advantage of showing your support to Suzanne Morphew. Keep the law enforcement folks in your thoughts and prayers, and let's help them as they move forward in trying to solve this case. As we close out tonight, I want to just thank Trooper Mike Miller, who helped us so much by being here with us. That was such a great thing to be able to spend time with him. And Profiling Evil's own Natalie Feuerstein. We always got to say thanks to our friends at Esri, Nearmap, Circa 3, Tyler, Casey, Tim, all of the gang. Thank you for what you do to make this content high quality, and to the Cold Case Foundation and Trace Labs. Folks, have a great night. Thank you for your support. Continue to consider things like ringing the bell and subscribing. We really are amazed at the growth that we're experiencing, and our commitment to you is that we're going to continue to roll out content that we hope you find valuable. Until we see you the next time, which is Thursday night for the Valentine Killer and the DNA discussion of the woman who helped solve the Golden State serial killer case. Make sure you join us Thursday night for that. And until then, we'll pray for Suzanne.
Yep. Good night, everybody.